wonderful song is being meditated for you. Listen with joy and call everyone. The road passes through mountains and valleys. Here the view is limited, there it is uncovered. And if the path winds gently through the groves, do not think that this is a mistake. We will know well when we have climbed enough to approach the goal at the right time. But let no one imagine that with all his wit he will ever explain the song to the end. Many people will gain much from it. The fertile earth produces 1,001 flowers. One goes away from here with a gloomy look, another remains with a joyful countenance. Each must enjoy as he pleases. The spring must flow for many a traveler, tired of a long day of walking, which he had undertaken by a superior impulse, leaning on his staff in the manner of pious pilgrims. Brother Marcus, abandoning paths and trails, arrived one fine evening in a valley to ask for some food, full of the hope that he would find, for this night in the depths of the woods, a hospitable shelter. At the foot of the steep mountain that rises before him, he thinks he sees the traces of a path. He follows the winding path, and, as it climbs, folds around the rocks. Soon he sees himself raised above the valley. The sun shows itself to him again, graceful and beautiful, and soon, with a secret joy, he sees near him the summit before his eyes, and beside it the sun, which, in its decline, still reigns magnificently between dark clouds. He gathers his strength to reach the summit. There he hopes to see his labor soon rewarded. Then, he says to himself, then we will know if human beings live in the neighborhood. He climbs, he listens, and he thinks he is reborn. The sound of a bell resounds in his ears. And when he has reached the highest peak, he sees a nearby valley, gently sloping. His peaceful eye shines with pleasure, for, in front of the wood, he suddenly sees, in the green meadows, a beautiful building. The last ray of sunlight illuminates it just right. He runs, across the meadows that the dew waters, to the monastery that shines before him. Already he sees himself very near the quiet place that fills his soul with peace and hope, and, on the arch of the closed door, he observes a mysterious image. He stops and reflects and murmurs the pious words of devotion, which awakens in his heart. He stops and asks himself what this means. The sun sets and the sounds fade away. He sees, erected with magnificence, the sign which is the consolation and hope of the whole earth. To which countless minds have pledged themselves, which countless hearts ardently implore, which annihilates the power of cruel death, which floats on many a victorious standard. A source of refreshment runs through his weary limbs. He sees the cross, and he lowers his eyes. He still feels what source of salvation has spread from there. He feels the belief of half the world, but he is seized with an entirely new feeling, seeing how the image presents itself here to his eyes. he sees the cross entwined with roses. Who then associated the roses with the cross? The crown blossoms to softly surround the rough wood on all sides. Light silver clouds sway to take flight with the cross and the roses, and, from the center, a holy glory with 3 rays blossoms, which starts from the same point. Around the image no legend that clarifies and reveals the secret. In the twilight that becomes ever darker, he stops and meditates and feels edified. He finally knocks, when the high stars lower their sparkling eyes upon him. The door opens, and he is received with open arms, ready hands. He says where he is from what distance the order of superior beings send him. They listen, they admire. They have celebrated the unknown as a guest. They now celebrate the envoy. Everyone draws near to hear also. Everyone is moved by a secret power. Not a breath dares to interrupt the wonderful host, for every word resounds in the heart. What he tells acts like the profound teachings of wisdom that the lips of children publish. In the frankness, the innocence of his manners, he seems a man from another world. "Welcome," cries an old man at last. "Welcome, if your mission brings consolation and hope. You see, we are all seized, although your appearance awakens our souls. The most beautiful happiness, alas, is taken from us. We are moved with care and fear. O stranger, it is at a decisive hour that our walls receive you, in order to bear mourning with us. For alas, the man who unites us all here, whom we recognize as father, as friend, as guide, who kindled in our life the flame and the courage, in a short time, he will leave us forever. It is quite recently that he declared it himself. But he does not want to say either the manner of the hour, and by that his certain departure is for us full of mysteries and bitter sorrows. You see us all here with white hair, and nature has invited us to rest. We have received no man whose heart too soon bade him renounce the world in his youth. When we had experienced the pleasures and pains of life and the wind had ceased to fill our sails, we were permitted to land here with honor, in the assurance that we had found a quiet harbor. The noble mortal who has led us to this place bears the peace of God in his heart. I have accompanied him on the path of life, and I know well the times of old, the hours in which he prepares himself in solitude, announce to us our approaching loss. What is man that he can give his life for nothing, and not for one better than himself? This would now be my only wish. Why must I renounce it? How many have already gone before me? It is he whose loss I must most painfully deplore. With what kindness he would have received you, but he has handed over the house to us. And although he has not yet named his successor, he is already separated from us in spirit. He comes only for an hour every day. He tells us stories. He is more moved than before. We then learn from his own lips how wonderfully Providence has led him. We listen attentively, so that the exact knowledge of these facts may be preserved for posterity, down to the smallest details. We also see to it that one of us writes carefully, and that the memory of our friend remains pure and true. I would rather, I confess, relate many things myself, than listen in silence as I do. The smallest circumstance cannot escape me. All this is still alive in my thoughts. I listen, and I can hardly conceal that I am not always satisfied. If I once come to discourse on all these things, the words of my mouth will publish them with more brilliance. As a simple witness, I would relate with more detail and freedom how a genie first promised it to his mother, how, at the feast of his baptism, a star appeared brighter in the west, how, with outstretched wings, a vulture swooped down in the courtyard near the doves, and, without striking furiously, without being severe as usual, seemed to invite them gently to concord. Then he modestly kept from us how in his childhood he tamed the viper which he saw slipping around his sister's arm and tightly clasping the sleeping child. The nurse fled and abandoned the infant, and he strangled the reptile with a sure hand. The mother came, and, with quivering joy, she saw the exploit of her son and the deliverance of her daughter. Nor does he say that, beneath his sword, there gushed forth from a barren rook a spring as strong as a stream, which, in rushing streams, wound from the mountain into the valley. It still flows, as lively, as brilliant, as it first rushed before him. And his companions, who saw this prodigy with their own eyes, hardly dared to quench their burning thirst. When a man has been raised by nature above others, it is no wonder that many things succeed for him. One must celebrate in him the power of the Creator, who calls the weak clay to so much glory. But when a man endures the most difficult of life's trials and overcomes himself, then one can joyfully point him out to others and say, "This is what he is. This is his own." For every force carries us forward, carries us to live, to deploy our action here and there. On the contrary, the torrent of the world hinders us and presses us on all sides, and carries us along with it. And this storm within and this struggle without teach the intelligence the meaning of this difficult-to-hear word. He delivers himself from the power that binds all beings, the man who overcomes himself. How young he is still, when his heart taught him what in him I hardly dare call virtue, when he knew how to respect the severe discipline of his father, and to show himself docile, while this austere and rigorous master charged the free years of his youth, with a service to which the son submitted with joy, as an orphan child, without shelter, thus by necessity, for a paltry salary. He had to follow the warriors into the field, first on foot, braving the storm and the sun, tend the horses, set the table, be at the service of every old soldier. Quickly and willingly he ran at all times, day and night, carrying messages through the forests, and, accustomed in this way to living only for others, he seemed to enjoy the only fatigue. How, in battle, he would pick up with joyful audacity the arrows he found on the ground, and then run to gather the herbs with which he dressed the wounded. What he touched soon healed. The sick man wanted to be treated by his hand, who did not observe him with joy, and his father alone seemed to take no notice of him. light as a ship under sail, which does not feel the weight of its cargo, and flies from port to port. He bore the burden of his father's lessons. Obedience was the first and last word. And, as pleasure carries the child and honor the young man, the foreign will alone have carried him. The father imagined new trials in vain, and, if he wanted to demand, he was forced to praise. Finally, he also declared himself defeated. He recognized by his actions the merit of his son. The old man's rudeness had disappeared. He suddenly gave him a valuable horse. The young man was freed from petty service. Instead of the short dagger he carried a sword, and after these trials he entered an order to which he had right by birth. I could spend days telling you more things that surprise anyone who hears them. His life will certainly one day be equaled by future races to the most admirable stories. What, in fables and poems, seems incredible to minds and yet charms them. One can hear it here, and one must resolve, doubtly delighted, to receive it as true. And you ask me what is the name of this chosen one, whom the eye of Providence has chosen, whom I have often praised and never enough, to whom so many incredible adventures have happened. His name is Humanus, the saint, the wise man, the best man I have seen with my own eyes. And his house, as the princes say, you will know at the same time as his ancestors. To spake the old man, and he would have said more, for he was full of these wonders, and what he was to tell us would have charmed us many weeks longer. But his discourse was interrupted, at the moment when his heart was pouring out most eagerly to his guest. The other brothers came and went, and at last reduced him to silence. And after supper, Marcus, having bowed down before the Lord and his guests, asked for a cup of pure water, which was also given to him. Then they led him into the great hall, where a strange spectacle presented itself to him. What he saw there must not be passed over in silence. I will describe it to you faithfully. There was no ornament to dazzle the eyes. A groin vault rose boldly, and he saw arranged in order around the walls, as in the choir of a church, 13 seats elegantly carved by skillful hands. In front of each was a small desk. There one felt disposed to devotion. One felt the calm of life and social life. He saw 13 shields hanging on the walls. For each seat was assigned its own. They did not seem to boast proudly of their ancestors. Each one seemed considerable and chosen. And Brother Marcus burned with a desire to know the hidden meaning of these figures. In the center, he saw, for the second time, the sign of the cross with branches of roses. Here the soul can imagine many things, one object distracted from another, and helmets are suspended on some shields. Here and there one sees also lances and swords, weapons such as one can pick up on the battlefields. Decorate this place. Here, flags and weapons of foreign countries, and, if I see well, also bonds and chains. Each one prostrates himself before his seat, beats his chest, collected in silent prayer. From their lips are exalted short hymns. Each one prostrates himself before his seat, beats his chest, collected in silent prayer. From their lips are exhaled short hymns, in which pious joy is nourished. Then the brothers, faithfully united, bless each other for the short sleep that is not disturbed by fantasy, while the others withdraw. Marcus remains, with a few in contemplation in the hall. However tired he may be, he longs to keep awake, for many and many images draw him powerfully. Here he sees a fiery-colored dragon, quenching its thirst in furious flames. There an arm in the mouth of a bear, from which blood flows in bubbling streams. The two shields were suspended at equal distances, to the left and right of the cross with roses. "You are embarking on marvelous paths," the old man said to him again kindly. "May these images suit you to remain until the time when the lives of many heroes will be known to you. What these places conceal cannot be guessed. It must therefore be revealed to you in confidence. You suspect perhaps that many things have been suffered and known and lost here, and what has been conquered. But do not think that the old man is speaking to you only of times gone by. Many events are still happening here. What you see is more and more considerable, and covered sometimes with a carpet, sometimes with a crepe. You are free, if it pleases you, to prepare yourself. Oh, my friend, you have only passed through the first door. You have been given a friendly reception in the vestibule, and you seem to me worthy of penetrating inside. After a short sleep in a quiet cell, a dull chime awakens our friend. He leaps out of bed with untiring vivacity. The Son of Heaven follows the call of devotion. Hastily dressed, he rushes to the threshold. Already his heart flies to the church. Obedient, peaceful, on the wings of prayer, he latches at the door and finds it bolted. And, as he listens, at equal intervals, 3 times a stroke is repeated on the sonorous brass. These are not the strokes of the clock. They are not the sound of bells. A sound of flute mingles with it from time to time. This strange music, and difficult to explain, comes alive in such a way that it rejoices the heart, serious, engaging, as if happy couples intertwined their dances while singing. He runs to the window, perhaps to contemplate. What troubles him and seizes him wonderfully? He sees day breaking in the distant east. He sees light vapors spread out on the horizon. And should he believe his eyes, a strange light wanders in the garden. He sees 3 young people, armed with torches, moving around, running in the paths. He sees distinctly their white clothes shining, tight to the body and elegant in shape. He can see their curly hair, crowned with flowers, their belts surrounded with roses. They seem to come from nocturnal dances, revived and beautified by their joyous fatigues. They run, they extinguish the torches, as the stars fade and they disappear into the distance. Good evening, dear listener. We have come far on our journey to dispel the myth which behexes our world, claims every year the lives of untold millions, and bars the passage which leads to the good society for all. I have just returned from a trip to the rolling hills and alpine peaks of its origin. Hessen, Rhineland, Baden-Württemberg, and Alsace, along the Schwabing to Zurich to Ascona countercultural folkish circuit, to its castles, chapels, and places of education, to Basel, where our boy became his own man. But I will tell you more about that when we have time in the future. Sebbe is already downstairs pounding on the gate of this keep where we have taken refuge and demands to be let in. Something seems to be following him. But he can wait, of course, for this is the second season finale of the Skullboys, and it demands an introduction. When Goethe wrote this poem between the years 1784 and 1785, the sciences of the skull were still very young. Half a century had passed since the zoological nomenclature saw the light of day in Linnaeus' Systema Naturae. When the anatomist path had been laid, and its first searchers had begun to march upon it. Close at hand was also the path of philology, or linguistics, for as we have shown in the very next year, 1786, Sir William Jones would for the first time lecture on the striking similarities among three of the oldest languages known in his time: Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit. Yet Lamarck's zoological philosophy lay decades ahead, and further in the distant future still were the ideas of Darwin. Teleological evolution and a world view of natural progress was, in other words, still a poetic Geist, not a scientific machine. Which means to us that there was in this poem's days no one of intellectual stature who felt the need to fancy themselves primitivists, to seek an origin through barbarophilia. There was no gradualism to react to when saving the hope of a white, noble Urheimat. What I'm getting at is that I think it is safe to say that according to Goethe, highest man was made on high from the beginning. We today know, and many other then, to be sure, knew, of course, thereabouts, when Teutons were Teutons. When the age of knights, swords, and fair maidens is said to have taken place. But for the poets of Sturm und Drang and Weimar classicism, there was nothing to halt the presumption that the primordial, the time before time, or why not the tohu wabohu, as the author says himself in his essay Geistesepochen, i.e. the Hebrew phrase found in the Genesis creation narrative, which describes the condition of the earth immediately before the creation of light in Genesis 1:3, which we are helped to believe, as the blind leads the blind, was occupied by Templars, for they needed not develop to become Aryans. They simply were Aryans since the beginningless beginning. Jost Hermand, who as far as I know coined the term Aryo-heroic, explains to us in the first chapter of his book Der alte Traum vom neuen Reich, Old Dreams of a New Reich, how this Teutonomania, which was the Central European version in the 1700s of the Scandinavian Goethecism of the 1600s, how it came to saturate much of the German intellectual liberal bourgeois class of the Enlightenment, And here comes a long quote. The enlightened concept of Teutonic freedom. When in Germany, from the early 16th century to the mid-20th century, there was talk of national origin, völkisch identity, or the innate essential characteristics of the Germans as such, the guiding image of the Germanic almost always appeared in this context. By the quote-unquote ancient Germans, as they were commonly called, one understood in this period an almost mythically viewed wish or dream people of noble, courageous, freedom-loving, morally strict, faithful, honest people, who need not hide behind any other nation in the world, not even behind the much-praised Romans. And the representatives of this thesis, since for a long time there were neither archaeological relics nor literary traditions of these ancient Germans, based themselves almost exclusively on a single document, namely Tacitus's Germania. Only one manuscript of this work had survived, which reached Italy in 1455, where it became known above all through the writing of the Germania Antiqua, in which Enea Silvio Piccolomini, the later Pope Pius II, compiled everything negative from Tacitus's Germania in order to prove how beneficial the influence of the Roman Catholic Church had been on formerly barbaric Germany, within quotes. In contrast to this, German humanists such as Konrad Keltis, Jakob Wimpfeling, Heinrich Bebel, Johannes Naukle, Ulrich von Hutten, Andreas Althammer, Philipp Melanchthon, Johannes Aventinus, and Sebastian Münster, on account of their secular political interest in national characteristics and at the same time their criticism of the influence of the Roman Catholic Church on Germany as interpreted as purely quote-unquote beneficial, emphasized in their writing between 1501 and 1541, above all, the positive aspect that Tacitus had said about the Germans. After all, the Germans, despite their inclination to laziness and drunkenness, which is by no means suppressed, are in Tacitus's Germania veritable model boys in all other areas. They are pure, unmixed people, that is, a race of their own kind within quotes, which knows neither cities nor money dealings, but lives in the country, delights in its great herds of cattle, loves neither pomp nor extravagance, but wears the simplest garments, mostly only a light cloak, or in hot weather simply goes about naked, has no sense for erotically provocative things, but values pure morals and decides late on sexual pleasure, knows hardly any adultery, does not abuse women as hetaira or slaves. A hetaira, by the way, is like the ancient Greek version of geishas, I think. But reveres them, indeed believes that something holy and prophetic dwells in them. Likes it when women nurse their children at their own breast instead of handing them over to wet nurses. Generally loves the simple and natural, values honesty above all, that is, lives without deceit and guile, constantly practices weapons play in order to be prepared for possible wars, venerates its gods in sacred groves instead of in dark temples, tolerates no dictators over itself but on its things, assemblies, jointly deliberates and decide on all motions put forward, chooses its kings and military leaders itself, etc., etc. That Tacitus intended this image of the Germans primarily as a counter-image to the moral and political decadence of his own countrymen, which he lamented, was usually suppressed by the German humanists. Whether deliberately or in national naivety, they simply adopted this positively stylized image of the Germans as it stood there. After they had long felt culturally inferior to the ancient Romans or even the contemporary Italians, they finally found in Tacitus a confirmation of their own self-esteem. That is, the classical proof, within quotes, that they too had a glorious past. That they too were a historically highly qualified people. That they too descended from morally and politically significant ancestors. And so Tacitus's Germania was already at the time deployed against French territorial claims in Alsace, or drawn upon as ideological underpinnings for the rising esteem of the Cheruscan prince Arminius, who alongside the Siegfried figure was later to become the highest guiding image of a true German essence as Hermann the German. As a result of this German humanist appropriation of the Germania, the following can be established, which also informs the views of those Teutonic patriots of the late 18th century who no longer basked in the favor of the German princely courts, but rather, in the sense of a popular democratic liberation, attempted to reintroduce the old Germanic freedom into Germany. According to these circles, the ancient Germans were not only the most noble and most valuable people in the world, but at the same time the true ancestors of the Germans, whose essential characteristics had been preserved in the German people in all their original purity and had only been temporarily obscured by an alien culture introduced by the Romans, the Catholic clergy, and the Frenchified aristocracy. And so there was in the second half of the 18th century a lively Teutonomania, especially in the bourgeois circles of northern and central Germany, which in many ways continued the traditions of the German humanists and at the same time attempted to legitimize, with the help of Tacitus, that profound aversion to the absolutist princely states, which in these decades gave their political hopes a decidedly anti-aristocratic, if not revolutionary, character. Admittedly, one must not overlook the fact that the bourgeoisie of this period was by no means a unified class, but split into at least two factions, which in their political and social perspectives differed considerably from each other. On the one side stood the rather reform-minded liberals, within quotes, who hoped for a gradual loosening of the absolutist system of rule, and on the other the more radically minded quote-unquote patriots, or democrats, quote-unquote, who saw their political salvation only in the complete overthrow of the feudal system of rule. The liberals, who emerged mainly from the upper and middle bourgeoisie, were still closely connected to the absolutist courts in many ways, whether as high officials, professors, or writers dependent on princely patronage, and therefore thought of a possible change in the existing power relations primarily in terms of reforms from above. It was their hope, as they wrote in numerous essays and pamphlets, that the princes would gradually recognize the demands of the Enlightenment. Above all, the demand for a greater personal freedom of the individual, and would no longer treat their subjects merely as underlings, quote-unquote, but as citizens, quote-unquote, with certain rights, who could be appointed to important offices on the basis of their education and abilities regardless of their birth. In accordance with this fundamentally reformist attitude, these liberal groups were careful not to formulate any radical demands that went beyond the gradual abolition of the worst abuses of the absolutist system, let alone make common cause with those who, in an open revolt against the established power, would have demanded the transfer of sovereignty from the princes to the people. On the basis of this ideological starting point, The political guiding figure of these circles was almost exclusively the philosopher, the enlightener, the old sage, or the princely advisor, who placed his hopes less on the innate qualities of the German people, and sought to derive these from the ancient Germans, but rather oriented himself toward the ideas of a generally cosmopolitan-oriented enlightenment, imported from France or England. This is supported by all those novels between 1742 to 1772, whose protagonists at court attempt to push through reforms that would also allow the lower nobility and the upper bourgeoisie a share in state affairs, instead of leaving everything in this area from the outset to the absolutist arbitrariness of the reigning prince. Because of this reformist basic attitude, most German liberals shrank back in fear from the events of the French Revolution. Above all, the propagandistically exaggerated bloody rule of the Jacobins, and increasingly shifted their already modest political hopes into the aesthetic, moral, or pedagogical realm. It was their conviction that political liberation had to be preceded by an intellectual liberation, guided by the upper classes. As Friedrich Schiller declared in 1793 in his letters on the aesthetic education of man. Indeed, 4 years later, he wrote even more clearly, quote, "German Reich and German nation are two different things. Separated from the political, the German has established a value of his own, and even if the empire was to perish, German dignity would remain unchallenged. It is a moral greatness. It dwells in culture and in the character of the nation, which is independent of its political fate. This Reich flourishes in Germany. It is in full growth. And while the political Reich wavers, the spiritual has formed itself ever more firmly and perfectly." End of quote. Through this retreat from the political into the spiritual, this flight into quote-unquote exuberant misery, as Friedrich Engels later called this process, German high and court classicism ultimately remained a cultural phenomenon that, although it has a certain foreglow character, largely avoided the political and social demands of its own day. That is not to say that its main representatives did not continue to adhere to enlightened reform ideas in their most highly idealized dreams. Yet they increasingly elevated such concepts from the realm of the real into the universally human. In this way, they finally arrived at societal utopias such as those in Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Wilhelm Meister's Journeyman Years from 1821 or Faust No. 2 from 1833, where noble steering organizations, the Tower Society, please remember that, or energetic self-help natures, the land-reclaiming Faust, still stand at the center. Figures who, as guiding images of a different, better society, still stem from the circle of reform-minded liberalism of the period before the French Revolution. End of the quote in its totality. So apolitical, reformist and spiritually advanced tower societies of liberals are to guide history in the right direction. And somehow this notion gets mixed up with Teutomania to recover the morals and true life of the ancient Germans, all before there even are any Jacobins to horror at. This is all a bit silly, yes. But we have come to know sillier ideas, and as alienated capitalist subjects, I think we too have felt its allure. So let us unpack the allegories as would a perennial seeker of the Prisca Theologia, the original spirituality, the first beauty, to understand the making of the functional Teutonic myth from this poem. We have Humanus at the center. It doesn't take a Jungian to understand that he, carrying the name, is the personification of humanity at its highest perfection, both the initial and terminal subject-object. Goethe himself claimed that the 12 knights of this Männerbund represented every religion which in the course of its history attained a moment of blossom and fruit, Blüte und Frucht, which showed it in perfect harmony with the true spirit of Humanus, the number 13. Considering this hierarchy, it is also not difficult to presume, I think, a hyper-diffusionist message. Notions of a single origin, of all that which has ever been thought and believed, the source of all culture building. Nuances and differences are merely a consequence of each knight's told tale, accustoming itself to each their own nation. In the end, they are all followers of Humanus. Certainly one doesn't have to read these stanzas this way. Goethe's best friend at the time, Johann Gottfried Herder, who is said to be the man behind the character Humanus, did not believe in a single origin, other than the creative act of God itself. Indeed, someone at Cambridge fairly recently claimed that Herder, quote, deserves to be recognized as the first cultural pluralist in the West, end of quote. Albeit that he did so reluctantly. He too had felt the allure. Now, keeping in mind that the Western ruling class has gained much soft power by paying lip service to the universalism of their own ideology, which goes hand in glove with the multifaceted compatibility of their mode of production. Though it all began somewhere in Liverpool and Manchester, diverse are since the superstructural hopes of those who have toiled and are toiling in the factories of the bourgeoisie. And seeing as this is the last episode of the second season of the Skullboys, we shall now recall instead a few seekers from our years-long journey hitherto on this podcast, who throughout the 1800s did not much care for this pretend pluralism, and expressed more directly the underlying singular ontological principle of the task they'd given themselves when looking for the urfolk. For this to make particular sense, and not just be a summary of the good times we've had so far, let's look at what exactly our Carl Gustav Jung said about this Teutonomanic poem at that foundational initiatory meeting when his cult came to be, on the centennial anniversary of Switzerland's neo-Protestant pietist invention, when the wave began to rise religiously again in 1914. Quote, "Nothing is new under the sun. That which I see ahead of us as an ideal analytical collectivity, Goethe saw and speaks of in his Geheimnisse. If it were not so long, I should be glad to read it to you now. It may not be familiar to you all." The poem was written in 1816 and no doubt was far ahead of its time. It describes a collectivity founded on the principle of the religious acceptance of the individual path and the Menschwerdung. As a symbol, this cloister has a cross, wound with roses, symbol of the resurrected life. The Tannhäuser motif of the budding staff, and Tannhäuser is an Wagnerian opera about like a medieval German poet, like a wandering poet, a semi-mythological figure from the Middle Ages. And it's also about the Wartburg festival, which we dealt with in the last episode's intro. Going on with the quote, "The chider, or the tree of life. The ancients say of the tree of life," quote, within the quote, "a noble tree planted with rare skill grows in the garden. Its roots reach down to the bottom of hell. Its crown touches the throne of God. Its wide-spreading branches surround the earth. The tree stands in fullest beauty and is glorious in its foliage." End of the quote within the quote. "This tree is the expression of a collective function created by analysis and life." End of the quote. As Richard Knoll points out in his brave and extremely dedicated analysis considering the institutional backlash he has received since the early 90s, of which I'm becoming more and more conscious, quote, "The applause Jung received after this last line was well earned. In this very brief address he not only spelled out the path of individuation, a road that led to self-deification, but he also inspired his audience with the guiding fiction that they were fellow members of a mystical order on a quest for the creation of a new type of spiritually superior human being, and for a new utopian society that would transcend type and sex. The world-redeeming process had now officially begun. Patients became apostles. Analysis became initiation. Cures became secondary to conversion. Their formerly mundane and spiritually bankrupt lives took on cosmic dimensions. They were on the path." End of the quote. Just 2 months ago, arguably the most popular English leftist revolutionary podcast, Rev Left Radio, published for the second time an episode explicitly about the value of Jung's legacy, even to a revolutionary Marxist tradition. As we shall see tonight, this is not an accident, since the world's richest have paid a lot of money to have their sirens and mockingbirds singing this false tune. I don't necessarily think the host of Rev Left Radio is such a mockingbird, but he has clearly been put in a trance by the sirens. And it's really true what Sebbe said in the last episode, that it boggles the mind knowing everything we know now, how this man's ideas have stood the test of time. But if even contemporary Marxists are so alienated by this shitty society that they are ready to buy the commodity that is individuation as a way out, we have to ask, where does this path of self-deification begin? Though this is of course not advertised as such, insofar that this is strictly speaking an Aryan-only form of quote-unquote therapy. We have together with you, dear listener, tried to give an answer to that question via our analysis of its underlying hypothesis for 2-3 years now. But we have continuously somewhat shied away from this vehicle's third leg, alongside comparative anatomy and comparative linguistics, to make a violent mech of such unspeakable brutality. One needs comparative religion. And it, which will quickly become clear, is not a spontaneous religion sprung forth from curious inquiry into the beatific. It's a vulgar, reactionary religion. Jung was, just like Goethe, afraid of the Enlightenment's totalitarian demystification. In Goethe's essay Geistesepoken, he describes the development of the human mind. Quote, Die Ursache der Welt. Good start, as always. Der Nationen, der einsehenden Menschen ist sich gleich. In English. The primordial age of the world, of nations, and of individual men is in all respects the same. A desert void first encompasses all things. Yet the spirit already broods over that which is in motion and formed, while the multitude of autochthones gaze around them in stupor and anxiety. Autochthones is like the same word as aborigines, but in a kind of more mythical sense. So like I guess Adam and Eve would be two autochthones, right? Or like Askenembla in Scandinavian Norse mythology, the ones who are made out of the two trees, right? When after Ragnarök, when I can't quite remember, but they arrive at the shore, right, of the new world, and there is like Askenembla, the two people who are made out of tree. There are loads of other ones, obviously, but yeah, that is what an autochthone is, I think. Going on with the quote. Piteously seeking to satisfy their most indispensable needs, a favored spirit looks forth into the great phenomena of the world, marks what comes to pass, and gives prophetic utterance to that which is present, as if it were but now arising. Thus have we, in the most ancient times, contemplation, philosophy, naming, and the poetry of nature, all in one. End of the quote. He goes on to say that it is all the result of a cosmic duality, Vernunft und Verstand, reason and understanding, the two essential historical forces, the alternating rule of which creates the various epochs of human history. He points out how critical understanding, Verstand, gradually undermines and destroys the mysterious, especially in the sphere of religious belief. Consequently, as previously discussed in terms of his thinking being a precursor to the irrationalist fear of degeneration, general disillusion is the result toward which Goethe believed his own time and the future were inevitably drifting. He closes the essay, quote, Und so werde auch der Wert eines jeden Geheimnisses zerstört, der Volksglaube selbst entweiht, Eigenschaften, die sich vorher naturgemäß auseinander entwickelten, arbeiten wie streitende Elemente gegeneinander, und so ist das Tohu Wabohu wieder da, aber nicht das erste, befruchtende Gebärde, sondern ein absterbendes, in Verwesung übergehendes, aus dem der Geist Gottes kaum selber eine ihm würdige Welt abermals erschaffen könnte. And thus is the value of every mystery destroyed, the popular belief itself profaned. Qualities which before developed themselves naturally work like conflicting elements against each other, and thus is the tohu wabohu again present, but not the first, the fruitful, the teeming, but a dying, a passing into corruption from which the Spirit of God himself could scarcely create once more a world worthy of him. End of the quote. Jung feared this more than Goethe, for by the time of industrialism proper, he did not even find any comfort in the Judeo-Christian tradition. He would even go so far as to blame it for the collapse. Noll suggests that despite Jung's theories of a Germanic phylogenetic base layer in all subjects of the right blood and soil, what we know as the political, not psychoanalytical, concept of a collective unconscious, which we will go on to criticize in more theoretical detail once Sebbe steps in through the doors of the land of the dead. We can actually, though he himself and his followers would deny it until their death, find the source of all of Jung's religious musings about the original Aryan religion in 6 authors popular at the turn of the last century. That is to say, not hidden organically deep in his mind beyond his Christian mask or persona, but on ink and paper high up on his bookshelf. They are, and our Skullboys research have already in part suggested that they ought to be, Nietzsche, Kreutzer, Albrecht Dietrich, Richard Reitzenstein, Franz Cumont, K.H.E. de Jong. We will not go through them all, and we will add some other names which inspired them, but in view of the fact that the ghost of Nietzsche has haunted us ever since we first started to talk about irrationalism, he deserves a more fitting circumstantial reintroduction. He was, which I had previously failed to notice, professor of classical linguistics or philology in Jung's hometown, Basel, during the 1870s. Jung came in contact with his work in the 1890s as an angsty teenager when he was a medical student. Through Nietzsche, he learned for the first time about the sexual underground initiations of the ancient cults, Dionysus, Zarathustra, but above all else, as we shall see, Mithras. As the young student said himself, Nietzsche's work was, quote, one of the first attempts in modern times to come back to the immediate individual initiation, end of quote. Years later, in the autumn of 1909, having returned from the 7-week trip to America, where the feuding had begun after Jung told Freud about his skull dream, which I'll read in full later to Sebbe, our aspiring acolyte, who by now had also quit his job at the Berghölzli and the uncomfortable supervision which it had entailed, we might presume, began instead to pursue the aforementioned path by spending more of his wife's money on luxurious travels and bribes to visit every archaeological site possible. In his own words, quote, "Archaeology, or rather mythology, has got me in its grip," end of quote, Jung wrote to Freud on October 14, 1909. This became a familiar theme in their correspondence over the next 2.5 years. As a boy, Jung had wanted to become a classical philologist or an archaeologist. His newfound project reawakened these childhood fantasies. Quote, "All my delight in archaeology, buried for years, has sprung into life again," end of quote, he told Freud. Soon, however, this study of mythology took on an almost obsessive quality, and mythological figures began to intrude in his daily fantasies and dreams. On February 20, 1910, he told Freud, quote, "All sorts of things are cooking in me, mythology in particular," end of quote. By April 17, he was afraid of the effect that his researches might have been having on his mental state. Quote, "At present I am pursuing my mythological dreams with almost autoerotic pleasure, dropping only meager hints to my friends. I often feel I am wandering alone through a strange country, seeing wonderful things that no one else has seen before, and no one needs to see. I don't yet know what will come of it. I must just let myself be carried along, trusting to God that in the end I shall make a landfall somewhere," end of quote. At some point during his mental breakdown, trying to figure out how it all began, he wrote to his mentor about the second source author on our list. Quote, "Now I am reading the 4 volumes of Old Kreutzer, where there is a huge mass of material," end of quote. Georg Friedrich Kreutzer, 1771 to 1858. Yet another Jena romantic, whom we've somehow forgotten to mention. Even though it's starting to feel like we do nothing else on this podcast. He would quickly become required reading for all of Jung's assistants at his private clinic, as well as those followers still stationed elsewhere within the German-speaking institutional web of psychiatric hospitals, where they went to the deepest caves and most forgotten locked rooms of the asylums, to pick and choose to record the insane's stories, visions, prose, hallucination, and self-analytical poetry, to prove the existence of that aforementioned collective Germano-phylogenetic unconscious. Why Kreutzer? Kreutzer belonged to the first generation of German philologists and archaeologists, and would become fundamental to both traditions. He, like so many others during this time and after him, believed that Greek mythology, which he claims was the best source material for all other pagan religions, was itself a corruption of a prehistoric spiritual worldview, the ur-religion of all human beings that had existed for thousands of years before language and cultures diverged. And though we have already met countless thinkers with ideas about the Adamic state since the Renaissance onwards, Kreutzer was quite original. According to Stefan Arvidsson in Aryan Idols, it was Kreutzer who first introduced northern India, Tibet, and the Himalayas as the Ur-Heimat candidates for his Ur-religion. Which in the case of Tibet, for me personally, and I hope for you too, is finally the discovery of a long sought after piece of the puzzle to this idea historical tradition. I mean, I don't know how many times I've asked that question these last years. But why Tibet? And this shifted historical and geographical focus away from Palestine and the Hebrews as the axis mundi, long before Anglo-American biblical archaeology is said to have even begun, even before the Great Game and British colonial presence in West Asia. Kreutzer did so by introducing a theory in which Abraham and Sarah were Brahmans of the Indo-European priest class, called Brahma and Saraswati. Abraham, Brahma, Sarah, Saraswati. How Kreutzer came to that conclusion is evident in the title of his most famous book, Symbolik und Mythologie der alten Völker, Symbolism and Mythology of Ancient Peoples. To Jung and many others, Kreutzer, with his symbolic interpretation, became the first and most important proponent of one of the four major trends in the reflection about myths during the first half of the 19th century. Let me tell you about these four paths quickly with the help of Arvidsson's Aryan idols before we go on. The first was the traditional Christian and rationalist perspective. Myths are lies. Ever since the Church Fathers, non-Judeo-Christian tales about supernatural happenings and divine creatures, myths, quote-unquote, Greek mythos, or fables, Latin fabula, have been labeled as heathen falsehoods that arose from hostile or stupid attempts to try to understand the message of Christianity, or from satanic conspiracies. 2. The naturalistic perspective. Myths are explanations of nature. David Hume declares in The Natural History of Religion, 1757, that mythology is only one branch on the tree of religion, which has been watered by people's fears and ignorance since the beginning of time. The fear of powerful natural processes, thunder, drought, eclipses, and so forth, drove ancient people to make the incomprehensible comprehensible by ascribing human qualities to nature. 3. The nationalistic perspective. Myths are expressions of the soul of the people. This perspective is above all based on Herder's thinking, who we mentioned at the beginning. If myths can be found in all times and in all cultures, then according to this reasoning, they are probably an essential component of the integration of social groups and of the spiritual maturation of the individual. Myths and similar narratives like legends and folk tales all have, according to Herder, a national or ethnic stamp, since they were formed when the folk soul encountered the natural environment. 4. The reason for Jung's initiation into Kreutzer and search for the Aryan Ur-religion. The symbolic perspective. Myths are veiled wisdom. Jung would use the second, the naturalistic perspective, the third, the nationalistic perspective, and 4, his corrupted Freudianism of symbolic interpretation, to bash to pieces the Semitic legacy of the first traditional Judeo-Christian interpretation, as to create his own polyamorous neo-paganism, introduced in his first bestseller from the year when he broke with the teacher in Vienna, Wandlungen und Symbole der Libido, Transformations and the Symbols of the Libido, from 1912. The most important symbol to be analyzed, the first absolute object to uncover behind myriad representations, pointed towards by an endless string of signifiers throughout history, as his deciphering would make clear, was the sun. The sun also just so happened to be heralded by a very specific symbol in the 1910s, arguably the most popular one of them all within the Völkisch movement, members of which would begin to praise Jung once his book increased in popularity, even becoming a bestseller. It, the original god, the bright disk in the sky, was signified by the swastika. And the swastika already checked box 2, naturalistic, being the sun, and box 4, symbolic, being, well, a symbol. and insofar that it had been interpreted for almost a century as an Indo-Germanic symbol, it could, with some faith, check box number 3, nationalism as well. Now regarding box number 1, the fact that the swastika had since the 1700s in German-speaking countries been called the Hakenkreuz, i.e. the hooked cross. It could, thought some, in a long roundabout way, make the case of a more original Christianity, devoid of Semitic influence. But we shall get there in due time. First, let's see how Jung began his Icarian project to thatch his wings and fly directly into the sun. Many people who are interested in the history of Christianity knows that the first Roman emperor to be christened was Constantine the Great, who ruled from the year 306 to the year 337. Then came his son Constantinus II, and disputes about the new dominant ideology plunged the empire and the upper classes into plenty of bloody civil wars. One of the few in the imperial family to survive the purchase was Constantine the Great's nephew, Julianus, who I imagine is much less known than the first Christian emperor, for he reversed his uncle's policies and reinstituted paganism and proclaimed a return to traditional Roman family values. He also used it as an excuse to purge the autocratic state bureaucracy of his enemies. But that's not what's important right now. What's important was his hymn to the sun. Quote, "What I am now about to say I consider to be of the greatest importance for all things, that breathe and move upon the earth. But above all others, it is of importance to myself. For I am a follower of King Helios, and of this fact I possess within me, known to myself alone, proofs more certain than I can give. But this, at least, I am permitted to say without sacrilege, that from my childhood, an extraordinary longing for the rays of the god penetrated deep into my soul. End of the quote. Jung very much liked this hymn and wrote his own in 1910. Quote, "We are all children of the sun. Out of its womb our planet was born. An eternal law of nature compels us to be within its sphere and influence. The immensity of space is cold, still, lifeless. Our luminous mother sun, warming and ripening our fruit, appears as the simple, true element of life. Our ancestors knew this in ancient times. Thus, their justifiable joy when the sun made its slow, victorious spiral across the sky. They then remembered that all those trees, which concealed their greenness in the wintertime, were consecrated to the god, Wotan." End of the quote. As Noll makes clear, Jung's massive hymn to the sun could not have come at a more opportune time in German cultural history. All around him, in places such as Bavaria, Thuringia, and Ascona, German-speaking youths were on the march. They were hiking, singing German folk songs, reading Novalis, Goethe, Haeckel, Wilhelm Bölsche, Hesse, and Madame Blavatsky, wearing swastika pendants and runic rings, bathing nude in the sun, and dancing around bonfires on the days of the summer solstice, the ancient German festival of the changing sun, Sonnwendfest. They carried banners with the ancient Aryan sun wheel, quote-unquote, on them, a symbol of God that could be found in the ancient homelands of the Aryans, Iran and especially India, in the form of circular mandalas. And they sang hymns of praise to the sun. Left out text. On the Bohemian circuit and around the world, Jung's Wandlungen und Symbole der Libido was such a countercultural success that in the years following the German edition of 1912 and the English translation of 1916, under the title Psychology of the Unconscious, Jung began to receive spiritual pilgrims from around the world who came to him to help them experience the mythic layers of their own unconscious minds. Left out text. The prose of Jung's Hymn to the Sun radiated from the pages of his book with a power that could seduce the spiritually hungry. Jung wrote with conviction derived from a personal experience so tremendous, so cosmic, that he could arouse the desire of others to want it too. But what exactly was this electrifying experience? End of the quote. To answer that question, we arrive at the next source author on our list, number 3 after Nietzsche and Kreutzer, Albrecht Dietrich, 1866 to 1908, was in many ways a follower of Basel University's Johann Jakob Backhofen, whom we have mentioned before as the concept producer of an original matriarchy, which also inspired Engels' theories about primitive communism. Dietrich, like other anti-modernist conservatives, would take things in a different direction than Engels. He is much forgotten today, primarily because he, like many other archaeologists and anthropologists born in the mid-19th century, talked a lot of shit and historical nonsense. But he is even forgotten by many Jungians, because much of the stuff that Jung picked up from him has been censored in the Jungian tradition's public foundational transformational journal, Memories, Dreams and Reflections. What is said in his private one the Red Book? We don't know, since his family doesn't want anyone to know. But let me nonetheless try to explain. It was Dietrich who founded the Eranos School in 1903, which Scott Ryan and Fergal over at the Dustlight Archives and the Kingless Generation have discussed throughout this summer. Eranos as an institution was of course in keeping with the trends of the time, i.e. that every bourgeois and aristocratic intellectual had to belong to some kind of more or less secret society, ever since the Theosophical Society was founded in 1875 as a reaction to the Paris Commune and the increased organizing of their class enemy, the proletariat. And as we know now, ever since Goethe wrote that poem about a tower society. Dietrich had been especially influential during the 1890s, which saw a renaissance in classical archaeology. Another trend which also finds its roots in the 1870s, since that is when Troy was discovered, which became material proof for the assumption that a kernel of truth underlied all legends. A legend which, insofar that the Spartans are concerned, promises, as Nietzsche likes to remind us, lest we forget, a centuries, perhaps millennium-long lasting, constantly victorious military state, under the sword of which the working rabble were kept in check, not by infiltrated trade unions, but by a noble caste of warriors. In short, potent, laconophilic catnip for the Skullboys tradition, no doubt. And it was also in the 1890s that Dietrich revived a particular interest in the ancient mystery cults, their special brand of personal religion, which to the idealists explained how the Spartans had become such undefeatable Übermenschen. According to Arvidsson, quote, in Dietrich's Mutter Erde, Mother Earth, Dionysus's modern following could read about the pre-patriarchal orgiastic cult of, quote, the demonic. That is to say, quote, those who cause, from Greek daimori, and the holy phalloi, within quotes. Before the rain was interpreted as the seed of the Heavenly Father and the sun's rays as his organ, the fertility process was seen as the result of throngs of phalli, quote, within a quote, throngs of little demons penetrating a motherly earth womb, end of the quote, within the quote. The demonic phalli, who were represented mythically and iconographically by Sileni and satyrs in Greece, and Sileni is the cow version of the satyrs, right? The satyrs are like goats, and the Sileni look similar, but they are like cows, I think. Later were given an important role in the mystery cult's secret rituals, within quote, where they participated as symbols in the drama of refertilization and rebirth, within quotes. The Christians, Dietrich writes, disapproved of the primitive Mother Earth religion, but they would oppose the phallic cult even more. Christianity carried out, quote, within the quote, a demonization of the phallus, end of the quote, which is basically the same thing he did before, but I guess now it means demonization as in bad demons. Before he was doing demonization, but good demons, I guess. And in German he's calling this Verteufelung des Phallus. So it's not really demonization, then he's using the German word, which is similar, the Teufel, right? Maybe that's why it works, I don't know. Going on with the quote. Because of factors like the loosening of social ties and the victories of the psychoanalytical understanding of man, wild Dionysus, with his retinue of phallic satyrs and Sileni, became a figure who could be upheld against liberal rationalism, Christian guilt, increasing industrial ugliness, and modern inauthenticity at the turn of the century. That this new paganism was not merely a game with mythical figures can be illustrated by the fact that some people tried to obtain permission from Nietzsche's sister to attempt to cure his insanity by imitating the cultic dance that the priesthood of the great Phrygian mother of the gods, the transvestite Corybantes, performed during ancient times. The Corybantian priests were seen as the direct opposite of Yahweh's ascetic, legalistic, and life-negating priesthood. Here a veritable, quote, within a quote, reorganization of all values, end of quote, has taken place. Christ on the cross is the misfortune of humanity. The heathen orgiastic Dionysus, its savior. Left out text. They wanted to return to the mother womb, to the dead, and to the ancestors. They wanted to move from present time to past time, within quotes. From the cosmopolitan mentality to the deep roots of the people, within quotes. From the surface of the earth of the deep of the earth's mother, within quotes. Or from the day of consciousness to the spiritual excesses of night, within quotes. Those who went the furthest, the turn of the century hippies and pre-fascists in Ascona and Schwabing, dreamed about renewing the rebirthing mother, the earth who guarantees the process of life. End of quote. Jung would take this to mean that polygamy was the most potent way to unblock the rays of this inner source of light and heat that had been eclipsed by centuries of monotheism and the monogamy crushingly demanded by Judeo-Christianity. Otto Gross, who introduced him to the Ascona-Schwabing scene, had taught him that much, as we shall see in tonight's episode. Now, getting closer to the censored material, we must note, most importantly about Dietrich, something that will not only explain Jung's thinking about his life mission, but also explicitly the thinking of, for example, Alfred Rosenberg and Heinrich Himmler. In 1903, the same year that he founded Eranos, he also translated for the first time a text which had come to him through the Skullboys' black market of stolen antiquities, which he called the Mithras Liturgy. It was part of a collection of papers today known as the Great Magical Papyri of Paris, which in turn belongs to a larger body of texts known as the Greek Magical Papyri. There is much lore surrounding these texts, and Wikipedia states in the article's first history paragraph, quote, "The corpus of the PGM," not sure why they shorten it like that, "were not based on an ancient archive, but rather are a modern collection that has been augmented by academics. The unclear circumstances of each text's production over a span of centuries have therefore occasioned some debate. Hans Dieter Betz, the English translator of the PGM, claims that the texts form a fraction of the quote-unquote magical books that must have existed in antiquity, and considers them a form of quote-unquote underground literature subject to book burnings at the time. He cites book burning in the Acts of the Apostles, Acts 19:19, Augustus's orders to burn magical books according to Suetonius, this is in Suetonius Augustus 31.1, and what he terms numerous, quote-unquote, early Christian book burnings, end of the quote in its totality. The American translator Betz came much later, after the war, when he moved to the US from Germany, but similar theories were already going around in Dietrich's day, and I think you can see now why Jung desired that which the Jews and the Christians had tried to take away from him and his people. Some Völkisch thinkers of the time, such as, for example, number 4 and 5 on our list of Jung's sources, Richard Reitzenstein and Franz Cumont, went so far as to suggest that the Mithras cult had once upon a time been the main rival of Christianity, and had things just gone a little different, had the die been rolled one more time, then the Western world would be Mithraic and not Judeo-Christian today. There was perhaps even a voluminous Mithraic liturgy akin to that of the Christian Church, but it did not survive antiquity, they said. It had all been burned as Arian heresy by the Jews, apparently. But this still does not explain to us why Jung himself then would also censor it in his transformation journal when explaining what individuation, the highest goal of Jungianism, is. Our first clue comes from a short summary on Dietrich by Noll. Quote, "It is probably from Dietrich's book on the Mithraic liturgy that Jung derived his conviction that an initiation into the mysteries of Mithras involved a self-deification process. Dietrich identifies as central liturgical images of the Mithraic mysteries the mystical union of, quote, man in God and God in man, and the unio mystica, the erotic union of humans with a god, end of quote. Perhaps this self-deification was a bit too on the nose for his rich Christian bourgeois clientele. To become an Aryan god through sex with an already individuated person or god. Had they known that, they might have had second thoughts about sending their hysteric daughters all the way to Zurich alone. And just to get some bearing before we continue, let's also read the passage where Noll discusses the influence of Franz Cumont, who had high hopes for the historic role of Mithras. Quote, "There were 7 grades to the Mithraic mystery initiations, and they involved sacramental feasts at which bread and water were consecrated and at which blood was offered as a sacrifice in ceremonies involving priests in robes who offered prayers, sang hymns and rang bells, as in the Roman Catholic Church, at the holiest moment of the ritual, the unveiling of the ubiquitous image of Mithras killing a bull, the tauroctony, indeed practically all of the elements of Mithraism that Jung refers to over his lifetime can be found in the chapter of Cumont's The Mysteries of Mithras, entitled The Mithraic Liturgy, Clergy and Devotees." End of quote. Jung of course never admitted this fully, since his whole project is based on these elements already slumbering latent in the depths of his Germanic unconscious mind. He never accepted cryptomnesia in his analysis of himself as he had for his sister Helene, when he suggested that she had learned about her visions in contemporary literature, rather than letting it spring from the tabula rasa of her mind as authentic spiritualist phenomena. To smooth out the edges, though, of this clear demarcation line, he did coin the term active imagination to describe the vitalist mechanism which through self-induced trance states unearths properly the truly hidden. And by properly it's meant only such material that can justify and prove the Aryan ur-religion. Quote, recent scholars have called into question almost all of Cumont's basic assumptions about the Iranian origins and sacramental ceremonies of Mithraism. Using the same archaeological and textual evidence that Cumont compiled while hunting down new evidence and deducing new theories, Mithraic scholars now offer very different interpretations of the mysteries. The main difficulty is simple. Although there is a wealth of archaeological material that is well preserved because the Mithraiums were built underground, there is not a single recorded account of the central myth of Mithraism, nor does Mithraic iconography provide us with the story. Any interpretation of the myth of Mithras, then, is an imagining, a reconstruction. End of quote. Again, what we have already stated in the very first episode of the first season, that there is literally no evidence whatsoever of the Proto-Indo-Europeans, no names, no texts, no relics, etc., which mattered little to Jung, because Cumont had called Mithras the old Aryan deity, within quotes, and Jung had already met him in his dreams. It is probably for this reason that Jung placed a greater emphasis on this cult over the other, less Aryan, Hellenistic mysteries. He and Freud would also argue about the psychoanalytical significance of tauroctony, or bull slaying, the only image found universally in Mithraic cult sites and the central icon of Mithraism. I too have some theories about this, but I'll leave them for the next season of Early Communism and the Ocean, since the slaying of the bull will be of some significance, as I have theorized in season 2 of that show that the religion, some say the first ever, that was invented by the first communist natural farmers in Mesopotamia, centered on the bull as a seed disperser before its domestication. I'm collecting evidence of similar material in other Vavilovian centers of high diversity of crop wild relatives and landscape domestication, where the natural dispersers might have been other animals such as yaks, bison, and alpacas, etc., but more about the role of the bovine later. Now about that dream about meeting the Aryan god. Jung writes in the censored seminars of 1925 that never made it into the MDR about his becoming this deity of the underworld. What sun it is that shines there, I leave for you to figure out for now. It followed a similar introductory dream about a descent which had come to a premature halt due to his being initially unable of accepting the darker forces within himself. What Jungians casually call the shadow, quote-unquote, but which we now know from his abusive practice means sleeping with his underaged patients, continuously cheating on his wife throughout her life, pursuing incestuous desires, etc. All that stuff one must do, apparently, to become a sublime Indo-European individual above bourgeois norms. Quote, that was in 1912. Then I had another dream that showed me again very clearly the limitations of the conceptions about dreams which Freud held to be final. I had been looking on the unconscious as nothing but the receptacle of dead material. But slowly the idea of the archetypes began to formulate itself in my mind. And at the end of 1912 came this dream, which was the beginning of a conviction that the unconscious did not consist of inert material only, but that there was something living down there. I was greatly excited at the idea of there being something living in me that I did not know anything about. Left out text. The serpent is the personification of the tendency to go into the depths and to deliver oneself over to the alluring world of shadows. Left out text. The walls kept on growing, And then I realized that I was in the underworld, that the walls were those of a crater, and that this was the house of Salome and Elijah. All this time I did not grow, but kept my own size. As the walls grew, Salome and Elijah grew a bit bigger. I realized that I was at the bottom of the world. Elijah smiled and said, "Why, it is just the same above or below." Then a most disagreeable thing happened. Salome became very interested in me, and she assumed that I could cure her blindness. She began to worship me. I said, "Why do you worship me?" She replied, "You are Christ." In spite of my objections, she maintained this. I said, "This is madness," and became filled with skeptical resistance. Then I saw the snake approach me. She came close and began to encircle me and press me in her coils. The coils reached up to my heart. I realized as I struggled that I had assumed the attitude of the crucifixion. In the agony and the struggle, I sweated so profusely that the water flowed down on all sides of me. Then Salome rose, and she could see. While the snake was pressing me, I felt that my face had taken on the face of an animal of prey, a lion or a tiger. End of the quote. Jung then goes on to interpret this dream with the usual Gnostic mumbo-jumbo in which evil and good, above and below, are the same, and that one should gradually accept the madness that he is Christ. But as we can begin to tell, this is an uncanny Christ, a Christ of the underworld, of the underground church. The consequence of this for the Aryan hypothesis as a whole will now begin to intensify leading up to the 1930s. So much so that when Knoll first wanted to publish this research in the anthology Mysteria, Jung and the Mysteries, the Jung family contacted the publisher and had it banned. Here comes a long quote from Knoll. Quote, Jung regarded Christianity as a Jewish religion that was cruelly imposed on the pagan peoples of Europe. Since Judaism was the product of an older and higher level of civilization than that of the European pagans, it had separated people from nature. The Aryans of Europe, especially the German peoples, had been civilized only 1,000 years ago, and were therefore closer to their ancestors and their ur-religion of the sun and the sky and sacred groves of trees. Semitic cultures, cut off from the primordial source of life, did not have any mysteries in which a direct experience of the gods could be attained through initiation rituals. They were therefore cut off from the renewal and rebirth that such mysteries offered the Aryans. In his book on the Mithraic liturgy, Albrecht Dietrich compares the central image of rebirth in ancient India, the mysteries of Isis and other Aryan cultural contexts, but notes that, quote, the Jew do not have this image, end of quote. Only Aryans could receive the sacrament of redemption. Jung often referred to the ancient mysteries as the secret, or hidden, or underground religions, and their social organizations as the secret or hidden churches that kept alive the divine spark from the dawn of creation. This leads us to an obvious conclusion. When Jung became one with Ion, and I'll just add here to explain, this is the Greek god of cyclic time, symbolized in several Roman mosaics from the 3rd century CE by the Möbius strip, what Nietzsche called the eternal return, and Franz Cumon unlimited time, i.e. non-historical materialist time, preferred by all idealists. You know, the whole everything is a flat circle pedophilic relativity, often depicted as a lion-headed, nude male whose torso is entwined by a serpent. Going on with the quote, in his visionary initiation experience, in his imagination, he was not only becoming a full participant in the mysteries of Mithras, he was experiencing a direct initiation into the most ancient of the mysteries of his Aryan ancestors. His new science of psychoanalysis became the 20th century vehicle of those mysteries. Most important, as his initiation experience also entailed assuming the stance of the crucified Jesus as he metamorphosed into Aeon, Jung thereby became the figure that fueled the fantasies of thousands of Völkisch Germans and European and American anti-Semites at the turn of the century. The Aryan Christ. End of quote. We know what the concept of an Aryan Christ does in theory. It removes the Jewishness from the Christian tradition, which the Jungians, though they claim to be free pagan, cannot but help to cling to. And there were, as we shall see tonight, many very rich, very white, often American, individuals during the World Wars who would pay good money to become part of that new religion and become gods. And for the movement itself, back home, Jost Hermann summed up Jung's Nazism in a single paragraph in his book Old Dreams of a New Reich. Quote, in the field of folk psychology, Carl Gustav Jung earned the inglorious laurel after 1933 of having celebrated the National Socialist movement as a quote-unquote fateful upsurge of the Germanic folk soul, and Hitler as a religiously quote-unquote possessed figure who acts like an quote-unquote incarnation of the folk soul and drives his followers into a sacred frenzy. In the midst of a worn-out, quote-unquote, reasonable, internationally organized world, Jung emphasized repeatedly during these years a quote-unquote genuine mystical medicine man had appeared in Hitler, who had decisively turned away from the pernicious intellectualism, within quote, of the Jewish race, and once again cast a glance into the depths, within quotes, of the Nordic racial soul. End of the quote in its entirety. And now, to end this intro, before we invite Sebbe here, is an inauguration ceremony speech that Himmler gave to the SS in 1937, where it certainly seems like the little ugly chicken breeder picks up the thread exactly where Jung had left it for him when he was just a little Wandervogel running around in shorts. I kept on asking all the big AI chatbots for this text, but all of them claimed that Himmler had never spoken publicly about Mithras or the Aryan Ur-religion. So I went back into my own notes and thanked myself on the brink of a panic attack by being gaslighted by AI that I had kept a link to the following text. I hope this is the last time in a long while that I have to quote the brain syphilitic nonsense of Heinrich at length. But I also feel compelled to do so, because many people knows that the SS produced a pseudo-scientific account of world history for political reasons, just as Hitler did in Mein Kampf. But if I was to simply say that Jung did the exact same thing in very much the same way, many people would instead find it hard to take my word for it. Even though it is clear that their historical relativism is not only philosophically similar, in the sense that when you think that everything is a loop, you no longer care about details and there are no more absolute events, etc. But that the propaganda story they replace the nuances and the material revolutions of history with is also so similar. Quote, "Gentlemen, when I speak to you today about the SS as an anti-Bolshevik combat organization, I do not intend to give you a mere political lecture on the current dangers of communism. Instead, I wish to lead you back into the deep historical and, if you will allow the word, metaphysical foundations of our struggle. For Bolshevism is not an accidental product of the World War, nor is it merely the revolt of the hungry masses. Bolshevism is the final, most brutal form of an ancient enmity. The eternal struggle of the subhuman, of the anti-race against the Aryan, the creative, the God-bearing man." And I'll just add here, in the version I have, the speech from now on is structured into 7 parts, from the deepest past that he can imagine to his own contemporary time, each section about 2 to 4 passages long. First comes, quote, "the peasant and the soldier, the Nordic foundation," end of quote, which situates the beginning in Hyperborea, as we have gotten used to by now. As is also tradition, there is emphasis on the belief that the Aryans up in the north, in Scandinavia, were peasants from the beginning, which is what brings order and contact with nature and the sun. And then to defend their property rights, they also had to become soldiers or knights. These ideas are all fundamental to the Blutenboden concept. By 1932, Jung had named his version Mind and Earth, rather than Blood and Soil, though the message is the same insofar as it explains why the Jews don't belong and the Aryans do. Made even more clear in his 1936 essay on Oden, or Wotan, his most beloved archetype to the end of his days. Unclear, though, why they then have to leave the north and move like nomads to Persia, as we quickly reach passage 2. Quote, "The march to the east and the birth of the Persian light religion. From this Nordic Germanic nucleus, the great Aryan migrations began. Our bloodline carried us far to the south and east. Thousands of years before the birth of Christ, a branch of this Aryan race pushed through the mountain passes and reached the Iranian highlands into the land we call Persia. There, on the soil, something momentous happened. The Aryan spirit, confronted with the hostile barren desert and the darkness of the indigenous savage tribes, gave birth to the highest religious expression of our race, the religion of light. Under the prophet Zarathustra, whom the Greeks call Zoroaster, the Aryan man recognized for the first time that the universe is a battlefield between two eternal principles, light and darkness, truth and lie, order and chaos. This faith is known to us today as the Mithras cult, or Mithraism. It was the original unspoiled religion of our Indo-Germanic ancestors. It knew nothing of original sin, nothing of the priestly domination of the soul, nothing of that slave morality that preaches turning the other cheek. Its god, Mithras, is the god of the sun, of the truth, of the warrior's oath, of the unbreakable treaty between comrades. He is the slayer of the bull, the symbol of the wild, chaotic forces that must be subdued and sacrificed to bring order and life to the world. In this Persian faith we find the entire soul of our race, the veneration of the light, the aristocratic principle of the chosen, the unbending will to fight against all that is dark, deceptive and evil. For us Germans, Mithras is not a foreign god. He is the same spirit that later appeared as Wotan and Thor, the same solar hero, the same guardian of the heroic ethic. I mean, so they were soulless and godless when they lived in their own native soil, apparently, and they had to come to Asia, I guess, Asiatic soil, to really become Aryans then. But somehow this works for them. And I guess, as we know, this SS propaganda is so familiar to everything we have gone through the last 2 hours about Jungianism that we can jump to section 3, where we finally get some familiar, usual anti-Semitism. The Semitic counter-revolt, Judaism and the poison of sin. But this ancient, radiant Aryan worldview did not remain unchallenged. From the deserts of Arabia, from the swamps of the Levant, a counter-movement arose, the Semitic spirit, embodied in the Jewish people. While the Aryan looked to the sun and the clear laws of nature, the Jew covered in his dark tents and schemed in his cities. End of quote. Which explains why the happily ever after didn't begin already when the Nordics arrived in Persia and found Mithras. And to further explain why this faith and people found it hard to continue once we move and migrate like nomads once again with the spotlight back to Europe. That is explained in section 4, Christianity, the Jewish weapon against the Germanic world. The next act in this millennia-long drama was Christianity. Let us speak plainly, gentlemen. Christianity is nothing other than a more cunning, more universal form of Judaism. Its founder, Paul of Tarsus, was a Jew who understood that the old tribal religion of Yahweh was too narrow to conquer the world. So he took the Jewish poison of sin and guilt, dressed it in Hellenistic mysticism, and proclaimed it to the Gentiles. End of quote. There are, however, as we have hinted at, many things about Christianity which they just can't bring themselves to renounce. These are mentioned in section 5, the Eternal War, from Mithras to the SS. But the struggle never ceased. It merely went underground. The knights of the Teutonic Order, the warrior monks of the Baltic, still carried a spark of the old Mithraic spirit, the spirit of a fighting brotherhood bound by oath. The Reformation was a fleeting attempt to shake off the Roman yoke, but Luther too remained trapped in the Jewish scriptures. Then it immediately jumps to the present, in the same section. Now in our time the same ancient enemy has cast off its religious mask and appears in its true naked form as Bolshevism. The Jew today no longer fights with the Torah or the Gospels. He fights with the doctrine of Marx and Lenin. Bolshevism is the Jewish doctrine of world revolution, designed to uproot all Aryan peoples, to destroy their states, their culture, their families, and their very blood. and to reduce them to a herd of slaves under the international Jewish dictatorship. This is the great confrontation that has been foretold since the days of Zarathustra and Mithras. It is not a war of nations, not a war of classes, not a war of economic systems. It is a cosmic war of races, a war of the light bearers against the servants of darkness, of the creative against the parasitic, of the order of blood against the chaos of the mob. Immediately after this, in section 6, this is, if we didn't guess it already, becomes the mission of the SS. And this, gentlemen, is where the SS enters. The SS is not merely a military guard or a police force. The SS is the new order of the Aryan Light. We are the continuation of the Mithraic warriors, the heirs of those Persian immortals who once fought for Zarathustra, the descendants of the Germanic Thingmen and the Teutonic Knights, which then finally continues in section 7. The political task and the final victory. In practical political terms, this means that we must be merciless. Every Bolshevik agitator, every Marxist functionary, every Jewish intellectual who poisons the spirit of our people must be annihilated. This is not cruelty, it is self-defense, as natural and necessary as cutting out a tumor or slaying a rabid wolf. When this war of annihilation is won, and I tell you with absolute certainty that it will be won, then the swastika will not merely be the symbol of a political party. It will be recognized once more as what it truly is, the ancient Aryan sun wheel, the sign of Mithras, the mark of the light that will forever shine over the Nordic world. I left out some parts because it's all very repetitive, for repetition lies at the very center of their contradictions. Christianity as the most foreign, yet the most innate. Nomadism as the most scornful, yet the greatest test of their vitality. Contradictions we have recognized before are not a hindrance to ideology. They are the very combustion of the Otto engine which pushes this vehicle further. Himmler's samsaric defeatism in believing that everything is a flat circle, a sun wheel of cosmic coming again, makes a fool out of all human agency. It's the corroding nihilist acid given to those who partake in the surrender to their karmic Hakenkreuz. The eternal return caught in a Möbius strip. They speak a lot about death, the fascists, but they show no obedience to it, which ridicules the true comforting sorrow of impermanence, sorrow which in turn makes worthwhile for us linear materialists this fleeting moment that seemed like it will last forever, but is gone in the blink of an eye. Such is life, a gentle worthwhileness which I personally hope is a rainy indication of the ultimate, beyond the duality of Aion and Chronos, falling drops which traverses the philosophical and theosophical discourse of a temporal and an atemporal God. But above all else, I guess, what Himmler is saying is really so fucking stupid that it strengthens my belief that one day it will seem like overcoming fascism was one of the easiest tasks mankind ever had to complete. Even though it seems right now like we're spending most our lives living in these gangsters' paradise.
En klubb av svarta magiker har samlats på en fyr några sjömil norr om det fördömdas ö. Det är en samling skurkar utan hyfs och polityr, fast de utanpå är vita så som snö. Jag är dödligt sårad av en förgiftad pil. Ingen har Det är som att möta en länge saknad vän som jag inte sett sedan 1402. Kaptenen låter lura sig när han mot kusten styr. Han går på grund i stormpiskad sjö. En klubb av svarta magiker har samlats på en fyr några sjömil norr om det fördömdas ö. Han lever inuti mig, han sover i min själ som en baby sover i sin moders fall. Som ett flygplan som har landat, som en droppe i ett hav, som ett fartyg som har ankrat i en hamn. Hemligheten är helt enkelt att stå ut och försöka låta tiden gå. Jag har en känsla av att jag har varit här förut, låt vara på en annan nivå. Biggles flyger österut på nya äventyr i en främmande och skrämmande miljö. En klubb av svarta magiker har samlats på en fyr några sjömil norr om det fördömdas ö. Det gäller världens öde i ett ondskans schackparti. Den vite kungen uppträngd i ett hörn. Du gör ett drag i full panik och hoppas på remi, men du är så förlorad man kan bli. Genom alla inre landskap och yttre själstillstånd rullar magikernas hånfulla skratt. Trots hoppfulla rykten om vapenstillestånd, du reser dig och springer som en katt. Du snubblar rakt i famnen på en törstig vampyr. Svårt att leva när man vet att man ska dö. En klubb av svarta magiker har samlats på en fyr några sjömil norr om det fördömdas ö. Och i grottorna längs stranden där uslingarna bor och där elden är den enda värmekällan, där blir det bara fler och fler som hoppas och tror, och legenderna berättas mindre sällan. Den vite kungens återkomst kan tyckas klent som tröst när man sitter fast i djävulens gap. Och diktaren river sig i sitt eget bröst för att kunna mata sina barn. Och eldarna brinner och skuggorna flyr och schamanen planterar ett frö. En klubb av svarta magiker har samlats på en fyr några sjömil norr om det fördömdas ö.
Okay, hello and welcome to the return of the repressed, the penultimate, no, not the penultimate, the last episode of the Skullboys season 2 and the finale of the Jung saga. I'm here as always with my comrade in arms, Sebbe. How are you doing, Sebbe? How's the summer treating you?
Oh, hello. Yeah, it's been a good summer, I would say. The weather has been great, and but now it's
Lovely.
over. Back to work. back to the grind and back to this series.
Right. I can't believe it's already cold back in Sweden.
Yeah,
'Cause
it's not cold,
excruciating
but
here.
it's starting to get a little bit chilly during the evenings, of course. I mean, the summer is only like 2 months here.
Yeah, I was so comfortable when I went, because now it's like 40 degrees it was yesterday, I think, up in the mountains. And it's like almost no wind, right?
Yeah, you're back in Japan.
So just waiting. Yeah. So just waiting for rain. And then it comes, really intensive rains and thunderstorms. But it's not like the rain season in the spring, so they are over pretty quickly, and then the heat returns immediately. So yeah, a few more weeks, I guess, and then at least, like you said, the nights will start to be a bit cooler. But yeah, miss it already to be back in the coolness of Sweden. And I had a nice trip down to Europe, right? I told you a little bit about that. I went to see the cathedral where our protagonist of our story in Basel, where he imagined that God took a shit on the cathedral, right? I had to see where that happened. Didn't go to his house.
Did you have the same vision?
I tried to see it, but mine was more of like a John Bauer-esque troll or something. That's the only thing I could muster in my visualization practice, and it wasn't very spontaneous. So it did have like a little bit my features in its face, the big troll. But you know, can't get everything, you know. Otherwise, I would start a cult, right?
You have a psychosis in the middle of Basel.
Start going. God is defecating on all of us. Yeah, no. And I also went to the chapel where I went even to the hometown where Hölderlin was born, because as we were going towards the chapel, where Hölderlin first mentions the word communism in any modern European language, though of course, I mean, this is the early 1800s, so it's gonna take on a lot of different connotations shortly after, but it was still pretty cool to go up there where he and Hegel did their pilgrimage. It was a very it's nice, you know, because it's like, it's not a tourist destination at all, so it's like only us there, and there was like nobody around, and yeah, on the way there was like a sign on the side of the autobahn where it said like, oh, here's the birth hometown of Hölderlin. And it was also pretty cool, like old medieval town, so you walk through, you know, like the gate.
It wouldn't
you know, like
surprise me that there's not many tourists going to the birthplace of Hölderlin. It's quite specific. You're such a unique specimen.
Yeah. And even less so than to the chapel, which is only important because he talked about communism there for the first time, right? But it was so cool. Like it was like a gate, right? Like the old medieval gate was surrounding the town, and then so you like walk through this old gate. And even the doors were still there. I mean, I'm sure they've been replaced, but they still look pretty old, like the 200 years old doors or something. And then like there was like an old man opening his window. He lived like inside almost the. There was even somebody who lived inside the gate itself. It had been made into like some studio apartment, I think. And then there was an old man like immediately after the gate, sort of where I guess the gatekeeper would have lived. And he like opened the window. And then he saw us coming, and he was like, "Grüß Gott," or something, like, "Hello, servus." and I just went up to him. I was like, "Oh, is this the home birth town of Hölderlin?" He was like, "What? Speak louder!" I stood there like screaming, like, "Is this the home?"
Have we even spoken about Hölderlin on this show, or should you like introduce him?
No,
to the
I did in the intro, but you didn't listen to the intro. So
okay, then it's
not
fine.
this intro, but the one one before, or the second one I think in the Jung saga. Yeah.
Okay.
So that was nice. Good time. Then I started talking to him, and he was so happy that I had come there to see Hölderlin's house. Yeah. And drank some beer in the beer garden, and
So now we got this chit chat out of the way. We have every minute will count here, Marcus, for this explosive finale. So this is why I wanna cut you off.
Cut me short.
Also, we spoke about this before to the listeners. Like, I speak to you every day.
That's true. So the listeners won't get any more chit chat about my travels, but that doesn't matter because I think we have a pretty good episode lined up here.
I think so, and I wanted to, and I said to you before we started recording now, and also yesterday, yesterday I found some, I think, very good stuff, and I was thinking of this, should I tell him or the audience before, that I think it's good, or maybe it's not as good. But then I thought no, I'm gonna stand 10 toes down here and say this is good, and you will see at the end of the episode, because I don't like this, petite bourgeois mentality of trying to have an out, right? So I will just say that I think this is very explosive stuff that I found, and if I disappoint, I will take it on the chin. And not just try to wriggle my way out of it.
Just put everything on. Put everything on the line.
We put everything on the line. Full blast here. I think this. This shocked me because, just as I said, just yesterday, because during the summer I haven't been doing as much reading, or I've been reading books, but not about for the Skull Boys, right? I've been reading some other books and enjoying the weather, etc. So in toto, not as much reading, but and then I will admit, I was kind of tired of this. I was looking forward to I just want to record the last episode. I want to get on with my life and fade into obscurity once again for a year or two, right. Before doing another guest appearance. But then, as one do, I because you were always on my ass this last 2 weeks, did you read this book? Did you, however? And I was just postponing it. Yeah, it's fine. It's and then I started reading yesterday, one day before this. So I'm not above procrastination, just as a lot of the listeners, I'm sure. And then I started reading yesterday, and I went into some rabbit holes, and then everything came back, right? My enthusiasm, and I was oh my fucking god, what is this shit?
Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know what it is. I've had, and it's getting more and more like this. When I'm doing research, I often find that the last 2-3 days will always be the most productive, because it's as if I have stored the most important things furthest in the storage house, and then I'm okay, now the whole place has been cleared out, and then I'm taking one last look, and I'm what is this over here? And then I also found something just the day before yesterday, which I think is the best thing that I have to bring to the table, and we don't know if we found the same thing, but it would be fun if we did.
And I hope I one-up you. I think for the ones that listen to you remember the Olof Palme series in the last episode, and the girlfriend. I think this one for me it eclipses that.
Okay.
It's
Okay,
like I was just like I was just like levitating yesterday when I found this.
Yeah. It's like a drug. I remember writing to Jimmy Falun Gong for like 3 years ago or something, when I first started to get like hooked on these feelings, when you're like, okay, nobody has made this connection before. When you like really get one of those sensations, it's so good. It's better than anything else.
Like we've been speaking about this for years, right? Like when you approach a new subject, you get this easy high, like the easy rush, because it's like you can have all of these low hanging fruits, and the more and this is why my like desk theory about like Sam Harris and idiots like this is that they are basically have this philosophical envy of Aristotle and all of the old Greeks, because back in the day the sciences were not as profound, right? You could like make up shit, and you could be like a universal genius, and this is something that like all of these thinkers in quotation marks on the right are like envious of. But it's not it's such a idealistic way of thinking about history and like the production of knowledge, etc. Like it's materially impossible to do it, so like their longing is for the impossible, right? And this is something you have to accept, like when you read. So when you start with something new, I remember like when I started getting into Marxism, etc., like everything was like, wow, it blows my mind. And then in the end, or not in the end, but like as you progress, you will not get that feeling as often. And you and some people, like they will then you
out of capsule.
Yeah, and then you go on to another subject, right? Because like we crave that feeling. But then if you persist, and it can be, like for years, but then you find, something again. And this is how I felt like with the Skull Boys. I think it was like, it has been a good series. I've learned a lot throughout. But like I will admit, for the last couple of episodes, I was like, I kind of know all of this now. Not like all the details, of course, but like the outlining. And then I started to lose interest. But I think that was like reignited.
And that's good.
And when you get when you get one of those apples high up in the tree, it's much more sweet and delicious.
Yes. Yeah. It's almost as if it could be another fruit. I mean, I think there should be like one major, like like how to say, the dethroning of the master signifier will be, I guess, like one of those, or like the major experience when it's like, capitalism bad, basically. And then you will spend the rest of your life filling out the nuances and the details and rehabilitating this realization, right? But that's maybe, more akin to seeing the tree for the first time, the tree with all this fruit. And then you start like, and you might have been there before, but you never really realized that is what that tree was about, capitalism bad. I know. Yeah, I agree with your general sentiment here. Of course, like this is, otherwise you wouldn't do it, It's good to keep on gathering fruit. But sometimes you do get like a little bit tired. And I mean, a lot of like books as well, I feel bad sometimes for people, because there is this trend in academia, right, to always like narrow down your the title of like a paper or a book, so that it seems like the more they limit themselves, the more appreciated it is by academia, and then sometimes can get very repetitive. For example, with the Noll's book here that we've been going through a lot, and even I think the most repetitive book so far was the a most dangerous method. Reading about the relationship between Jung and Freud, it's like, yeah, I think you really need a deep interest in their personal relationship to like get through that whole
at one
book.
point you get like, I don't care.
yeah. I mean, they're so like, now I know more about how they care about each other than like, than I know about how my parents met, for example, or like, or like how, even maybe like I haven't, written as many letters to you or to like my brothers as I have like read between these two guys. So it's it gets a little bit out of hand sometimes. But then you find a few things that and this is a similar kind of like realization, but it's also nice, when you find something that verifies something you have spoken about before. And this one verified your, intuition, like, because you've read so many, books about abuse and, all the darkest shit, which I don't even want to like read about. And you're always sending me this horrible stuff, like those, like that YouTube channel with like those people who had like been ritually abused when they were young, Phoenix and Ardry or whatever it was called, can't remember. Like when we first started to get Epibrain, right? And so you had this intuition that like, I mean, considering how like good Jung is at like abuse and like, and how early he got interested in this, like where did, how can you be like so young and already like mesmerized literally by these kinds of powers? And then of course you were right, like he had been abused. So I found like a letter to Freud. I can read a letter, and then I found another one from another book backing it up. Thank you for listening this far, dear listener. This is where we must part our ways. And if you want to find out what it was that we uncovered in this season finale, then I strongly recommend that you head on over to the Patreon and that you sign up, and then you will immediately gain access to another 4 hours of our reporting on the fruits of this investigation. Thank you so much for listening. Again, hope you have a nice set of last weeks of this summer. Bye-bye.